Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Winter was approaching fast this time. Yesterday it was still warm, and couples in love were wandering around parks and kissing. But it had taken 24 hours to make everyone wrap themselves in warm scarves up to their eyes and put away light sweaters. Now they had to dress not for beauty, but to stay warm. Even beggars, who were numerous in warm weather, now preferred to hide in glass pavilions with ATMs. From there, however, they were chased away. "Did you want to help yourself?" a man in his 50s asked sternly. Coming in from the cold, he brought a cold draft with him, and the two vagrants who had dozed off immediately woke up. "There's nowhere to rest. They won't let us," grumbled the younger one. "Are we not human beings?" he shouted and headed for the door. The other one didn't even move. "And do you need a special invitation?" the man asked. The tramp smiled crookedly. "I guess I don't look like me at all, since you don't recognize me." He pulled off his hat and ruffled his hair. "Doesn't look like this." "Brian," the man whispered. "Is it really you? How did you get here?" "Why the bum?" "Bitter," Brian grinned. "Long story, Jeffrey, I'm too lazy to tell. And my throat's dry." He gave the man a sly glance. Maybe this ruse would work. And then, at least tonight, he'd be fed. It did. Jeffrey pulled a card out of his wallet. "I'll withdraw some now and then we'll go. We'll eat, have a drink. Tell me all about it." Half an hour later, Brian was sitting across from Jeffrey in some cheap cafe, eating his third shawarma. Of course, a tramp wouldn't be allowed in a decent place. One wouldn't dream of it. But who cares if it's warm and even has food?
"What happened to you?" Jeffrey asked. He hadn't gotten himself anything but coffee, but he hadn't touched it either.
Brian searched his eyes for a napkin and, not finding one, wiped his lips with the palm of his hand and sipped his beer. "Started out as me being a fool. Didn't take your advice, Jeffrey. Figured I was a smart kid and could get away with it. So, to make a long story short, I came up with a cunning plan." "What kind of plan?" "Well, listen to this. I wonder if these moms do any parenting at all," Brian thought, cringing at the squealing of children. He himself was lying on the top shelf, trying to fall asleep to the measured clatter of the wheels. But how could he fall asleep to the squeals? They say it's good to sleep on trains. That's a lie. The neighbor from the bottom shelf looked at him guiltily. "Did we wake you up?" "Excuse me, please?" He turned away without answering anything. It was sickening enough as it was. He boarded this train with one single thought persistently drilling into his brain. "I'm broke. I'm a beggar. Not only am I a beggar, but I owe everyone in the world." Realizing this proved to be an impossible task. It's hard to readjust. You still act like a wealthy man. You retain your old tastes and habits, and then you stumble over and over again with undeniable truths. You're left with nothing but debt. Instead of your favorite restaurant, you go to a stall for a hot dog, and instead of throwing away a shoe that has fallen apart, you glue it on. From the usual stores, too, it is better to give up. Now you have to go to the market. It's disgusting, but where to go? 6 months ago he had money, opportunities, and a more or less peaceful life. Now there's no business, no peace of mind, nothing at all, not even money for a separate compartment. He again remembered in detail the day when he could still change something, but who to blame? He himself chose not to listen to the voice of reason and indulged his own stubbornness, and for that he had paid the price. He was awakened by a phone call. That in itself was cause for a bad mood, but it was Jeffrey. He never bothered anyone for nothing. I'd have to answer it. "Hello," he mumbled into the receiver. "Woke you up. I don't care. Why are you calling?" "Warehouses caught fire." "Earthquake," Jeffrey replied almost nonchalantly. "It pains me to tell you this, Brian, but I'm afraid our network won't survive the crisis. We need to sit it out, wait it out." "What?" Brian asked sleepily and yawned loudly. "Look, Jeff, I've told you how many times. No working information until 11:00, except for the most urgent. I'm still not awake and not thinking straight anyway."
Sorry, his interlocutor replied dryly. "You have 40 minutes to wake up. I'm on my way to your place," he passed out.
Brian pulled the blanket off the bed, wrapped himself in it like a cloak, and strode barefoot into the kitchen to warm water. He was desperate for coffee. Brian preferred not to think about what he was going to hear in 40 minutes. He knew damn well, without any smart uncles, that this was a volatile time for business. So what do you want to do? Lower prices or raise salesmen's wages so they don't quit? And how does it coincide with the interests of the business? His cause, by the way. He's a businessman, not a philanthropist. Jeffrey showed up exactly 40 minutes later, as promised, not a second late. Nerd. "Precision is the courtesy of kings," Brian greeted him. "Let's go to the kitchen. I'm waking up in there. Do you want a splash of coffee?" "No thanks." He sat down at the table and pulled some papers out of his briefcase. "Look at this, Brian." He slid his eyes indifferently over neatly filled tables and some boring sheets. "Well, what's this?" These, Jeffrey picked up the top sheets, are estimates from suppliers. Next is logistics. Look at the payroll here, and here are the electric bills, but most importantly, the monthly reports. How scary. Brian made scary eyes, but Jeffrey didn't even smile. Scary we're in a financial hole, Brian, and before it gets worse. Brian jumped up and walked nervously along the table, adjusting his crooked chair for some reason. "So, what's this got to do with?" "Well, the crisis. Is this the first time?" "Things will get better soon." "I doubt it. It used to get better because people had to go to the stores anyway, buy there, choose from what we are ready to offer them. So now what's changed?" Jeffrey sighed. "An online marketplace that provides a huge range. Do you have any idea what that is? A monster that will wipe out live commerce at the root, and their prices, mind you, are significantly lower. Don't be in a hurry. These marketplaces of yours are just a trendy toy that everyone will soon get bored of. People like it when they have the opportunity to smell, touch the goods. You're already scared. People will realize very soon how great it is to shop around the country and compare prices. Reviews save money and time. It used to be the privilege of only the very rich, but now it's available to everyone. Oh, listen to you, it's like everything. It's the end of the world. Not the end, but the best thing we can do now is slow down and go online too and lower prices like everyone else. We'll have to. But we'll be able to win on employee wages. We won't have to pay the salespeople anymore. Look, Brian, I'm not kidding. We're going to lose everything if we don't suspend our operations. Right now, there's still a chance to save anything. In 6 months, it'll be gone. Oh, don't lecture me, Brian snapped back. As we've worked, so we'll work. That's it. There's nothing to talk about.
I should have listened to Jeffrey, Brian thought for the umpteenth time. I should have. But what are you talking about now? You stuck your neck out like a donkey and walked away. Here's your principles. Eat up. Don't be deceived.
On the next shelf, the baby cried again. The mother immediately came up, whispered, took her loud-voiced child in her arms. It didn't help. The baby continued to cry, louder and louder. Brian buried himself in his pillow and covered himself with a blanket. When he stepped off the iron step and onto the platform, he breathed a sigh of relief. How tired was he of this journey? It had been a long time since he had traveled by train. He had always preferred airplanes and was used to business class. But now he had to remember the forgotten past, and it would be better to forget it all back soon. 3 days in a parlor car equaled 3 years in a communal apartment. Children screaming and running back and forth without stopping. Men drink and argue politics out of boredom. Students are a separate problem. Why are they so noisy? They roar like horses. They sing songs to the accompaniment of a guitar, and they're hugging in the vestibule. Thank heavens. It's all over. Now he would come home. The last time he called home his home was 20 years ago. When he left, he hoped with all his heart that he'd never come back here again. But he had to. Life forced him to, and there was no reason to get cocky in front of his acquaintances. The streets familiar from his childhood were bustling with people and cars, but Brian didn't notice the hustle and bustle. It suddenly seemed to him that he was watching some infinitely old movie, where he was 17 years old again. After all, nothing had changed. Well, maybe some new signs have been added. The coffee shop at the station changed its name. It used to be called the Roadhouse. Now it's the Tired Wanderer. But in essence, it's the same as before, and it's like he's back to his old self. No money again, not a dime in his pocket, same as before. Okay, stop whining, he mentally ordered himself. You want to get out of the hole. Not to complain, but to act. Only his mother had agreed to what he had planned. After all, her permission was still required. Once in his yard, Brian stood for a few minutes, looking at the house where he had spent his childhood and part of his youth. How strange. Had he really lived here once? A 5-story gray stone building, small windows with still old-fashioned wooden frames on them. Brian remembered the wonderful thing he'd done when he was a kid, insulating the windows for winter. They used to put absorbent cotton between the frames. It had to be stuffed into the gaps of the closed window so that the wool wouldn't fall out. Additionally, the gap was sealed with painter's tape or just long strips of paper. Indeed, it became warmer. But the window could not be opened until spring, and in spring all this construction was removed. The windows were ceremoniously washed, and one could live quietly until the cold weather. More convenient plastic ones appeared much later. And what kind of junk on the long balconies can be seen? They are still used as storerooms for garbage. The horror. Parking, of course, there is no parking lot. The cars are mostly old cars parked according to the principle of who got up first is the place to go. And there's the merry-go-round she and her friends used to ride in 6th grade. It's still standing there all twisted, and no one had fixed it in all those years. There was a peculiar smell of wet stone in the entryway, so someone had recently scrubbed the floor. But at least they cleaned. He went up to the 3rd floor, stepped to the familiar door, and pressed the bell button. Emily had been on her feet since 6:00 this morning, and had run to the market before noon, where she had left almost half of her pension. But it couldn't be otherwise, for her son was coming to visit. The last time they saw each other was 20 years ago, just after Brian received his school-leaving certificate and rushed to the train station the next day to conquer the capital. Conquered, I guess. In any case, he occasionally sent his mother money orders and wished her a happy New Year and on all her requests to drop by at least for a couple of days. He always said that he was working. No time at all.
Maybe I'll come to you then, she suggested. Cook you something delicious. See how you live. I've never been to your place.
So you'll come and sit at home all day, he asked, and in his voice I could already clearly hear the irritation. Why home? Because you don't know the city. And I only come home for the night. That's it, Mom. Emily hung up the phone and sighed softly. She couldn't forgive herself for living with Brian's father for so long. What kind of example was he setting for his son? All he knew was to get drunk and change mistresses, and no respect for his parents. If it wasn't for Emily, there'd be no one to take care of them. They loved her, called her daughter. She should have divorced her husband, but she didn't have the courage. So the boy saw all that art, grew up selfish, and now he came to see me. How could you not take him in like a human being? Brian loved meat pies and his mom's borscht. So when she got home, Emily rushed into the kitchen to prepare a treat. For the arrival of her favorite son, maybe he'd stay home. Yes, we'll be refreshed. Remember that there are such things as family and the warmth of the hearth. At the sharp ringing of the doorbell, she dropped the spoon she was stirring the roast with. Ah, what a pity that there was no time to tidy up. Now she would appear to her son disheveled, in a robe, without makeup, running past the mirror in the hallway. Emily rubbed her cheeks a little. At least a blush would appear. Emily held out her arms to him. Her son leaned over politely and touched her cheek lightly with his lips.
Hey, Mom, how are you doing?
Something wasn't right. Something wasn't right at all. And it wasn't that it was hard to recognize the 17-year-old boy she remembered in this grown-up, motherly man. It was just that her son looked at her so coldly, studying her, as if it was not his mother standing in front of him, but a complete stranger, perhaps even an adversary. His mother's eyes were faded as if burned out, like a once bright cloth under the hot southern sun, and something important was missing from them. Brian couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Had she stopped coloring her eyelashes? But when he looked closer, he realized it wasn't her eyelashes. It was just that his mother's eyes were sad. There were no usual sparks of laughter in them. That's strange. Mom was always so cheerful, loved to laugh and infect others with her laughter. What happened to her? So this is how you live, he said, looking around at the old furnishings. The sofa, which he remembered from his early childhood, must be all beaten up. You'd have to lie down, and the springs would be digging into your sides. True, his mother had covered it with an orange plaid, but that was just a trick to hide the worn upholstery. The TV's on the nightstand, and the only new technology is a laptop. What's the mother want it for? I wonder if she's on Classmates. Maybe you watch movies though. So you're living, you don't change anything. I lived the same way, Emily replied. Brian stood up, walked across the room, and looked up. Look, there's a crack in the ceiling, there in the corner. See, he pointed his finger. It's understandable, though, how old this wallpaper is. Not remembering the food, for which he'd lost interest, Brian squatted down, pulled back a corner of the rug, and peered at the floor at the baseboard. What did you ask? There's a gap between the wall and the baseboard. We'll have to put in here, she said. What's that for, Brian? I'm fine as I am, he frowned.
And how are you doing? The woman asked.
Go see for yourself, Emily shrugged, clearly annoyed by her son's questioning. Somehow, this wasn't human. They'd met, and Brian hadn't even hugged her. He hadn't asked her about her health or tasted her mother's treats. She'd tried so hard to please her boy. She'd been looking forward to seeing him. But the son almost immediately began to walk around the apartment, inspecting the shortcomings, and started talking about repairs, as if he hadn't come to his mother's house, but to buy a home. The tiles are almost falling off, and the faucets should be replaced, she said. We'll replace them. What's wrong, Mom? He sat down again on the chair opposite and looked at her reproachfully. You don't look after the house at all. You've neglected everything. It's going to take a lot of repairs alone. Emily smiled openly, simple-mindedly, like a child. It's true what they say. Old people are like children, Brian thought fleetingly. Where am I going to get the money for repairs, Brian? I can't afford it on my pension. Medicines have gotten expensive. Or haven't you been home in 20 years? You've forgotten how we live here. Stop it, Mother, he grumbled. Forgotten, not forgotten. What does it matter? After all, I've explained it all to you already. There was plenty of work to do. I didn't bend my back for my uncle or sit on a salary like some people. Of course, it's easier for them. You work from 10 to 6 and walk away. Why don't you have any vacations at all? She asked. Employees have vacations, the son said patiently. It was obvious that this conversation was making him nervous. In your own business? It's like the commercials say, work 24/7. If you go away for a week, they'll steal everything. It must be hard. His mother looked at him sympathetically.
Her look made Brian uncomfortable. How infuriating was this kinship thing, wasn't it? He'd long ago considered that he had no kin, and his mother didn't count either.
Yeah, she'd raised him and all that. But first of all, she was legally obligated to take care of him until he came of age. And secondly, he'd already been living on his own for 20 years. Well, she sent him some money at first, but that was a long time ago. And he himself, let's be honest, would never have come here if it weren't for the need. Well, at least you'll stay here, get a break from everything, continued my mother. You want to lie down on the sofa, and I'll bring you some pies. Or maybe it's hot. Better borscht. I made some delicious borscht. Brian mentally cursed. He'd had enough of borscht and pies. He hadn't come here to eat. Thank you, Mother, thank you. But I'm not hungry yet. That's what I've come for. I'm in trouble. What's the trouble? She asked. Emily was alarmed. You're not ill, no, that's different. You see, there's a crisis everywhere now. Money is depreciating, that's right, Mom nodded. Prices change every week. I used to buy milk for 45 rubles, but since Monday it's already 47. And then they have taken the fashion. They write on the price tags large, for example, 47 rubles. And next to a small font 0.99 rubles. But it's almost 48 rubles. No money will be enough. I once met Aunt Lucy in the supermarket, a neighbor from the 4th floor. I remember her son Alex was friends with you. He's a salesman now. He's got a technical degree, Brian wondered. Yeah, Emily grinned wryly. So he's a tech salesman, computers, cell phones. So I met Aunt Lucy and I saw her take a caramel from the ones they sell in bulk and eat it.
Then she walked on and snatched another one again. And believe me, Brian, I'm looking at it and I'm ashamed. I'm hiding behind the racks and I'm not breathing. What's the matter with her? Maybe there's something wrong with her head. He asked her why she was stealing, but her mother shook her stealing. No, son, there's nothing wrong with her head. She just can't afford to buy candy, but she wants to.
Alex can't help her. I've got 2 kids growing up myself. My wife is on maternity leave with them. I felt sorry for her. I went the next day, picked up these caramels. Then I went to her. I said, Lucy, they gave me a treat at work, and I don't like sweets. Take some for yourself. Eat them with your tea so you work. Mother, he rejoiced. If so, maybe I won't have to. Maybe things will be resolved more easily. Jeffrey immediately daydreamed. What kind of work could she do at her age? Well, maybe cleaning somewhere for a penny? That's all the income. Yes, that's right, mopping floors in a bakery, Emily confirmed his guess. Unofficially, of course, they don't pay much, but that's thanks enough, isn't it? I saw Aunt Lucy again the next day, only this time she took an apple and ate it. And it's a good thing she ate some fruit. After that, she didn't buy a little bit, though, but she brought me back change. There's plenty of it. What else is there? He wondered. But he had already forgotten about her. I'll have to go there soon and have a look around. The house is a wreck, of course. It was a wreck 20 years ago, but the land is the land. The main thing is that if the apple trees bear fruit, it's not bad at all. Oh, it's not bad, no, come on, Brian, he cheered himself up. It looks like it's going to work out. It's going to work out. I thought you sold the cottage a long time ago, he said. trying to stealthily turn the conversation to the main topic of his concern. "No, Brian, why would I sell it? I grow potatoes, tomatoes, and cucumbers and apple trees on it. If I sell it, I'll have to buy it all at the store." But Brian tried to put the right note of concern and slight worry in his tone. "It must be hard for you, traveling back and forth with the crops." The mother sighed heavily. "But where to go? You have to live somehow. It's always the same song," Brian thought irritably, tossing and turning on the old and uncomfortable sofa. His mother had made his bed here for a reason. He'd asked for it. "The fool," he said. "I want to remember my childhood well." Did he remember? The wall clock ticked annoyingly loudly. How could my mother fall asleep to that? Why do these pensioners get so attached to all kinds of junk? Why do I need this watch? Can't you watch the time on your phone? What's this summer house for? Growing an apple tree when apples cost a penny at the store. Buy yourself 10, you'll eat them yourself and have enough left over for your famous Charlotte. But no, you have to go to the Dacha. She saves money, you see. And if you calculate, even in a rough way, the travel back and forth, then still water, vegetable garden, irrigation, a lot of effort to grow something there. It's a golden harvest. She saves money, economist. But how pleasant it is to bring her neighbors gifts. For her own money, by the way. Just this, please, and no financial literacy, he thought with a new attack of rage. But in fact, he was angry not so much at his mother as at himself. He hadn't been the smartest either. He hadn't listened to Jeffrey, and now I had to deal with the consequences. Do I look like my mother? Just like her, shallow. The thought was so depressing that Brian immediately felt like a 5-year-old kid who'd been given a book instead of a toy for New Year's Eve. He wanted to resent the whole world, crawl under the couch and start crying. Except he's not 5 anymore. Oh, not 5. And instead of a disgusting book, he got a collapse of business and complete lack of money. And you can't just crawl under the couch. Emily couldn't sleep either. Her son's unimportant sudden arrival, his strange aloofness, it was confusing. Why had he come, when from all appearances he didn't miss his mother at all? Didn't Emily miss him? Emily had a way of appearing like a simple-minded retired grandmother when necessary, but she really wasn't. In her conversation with her son, she deliberately left out a lot of things. For example, that her job was not scrubbing floors in the bakery. Having retired, Emily with a month of bewilderment, and then realized to sit idle, a luxury is not for a pensioner. To get a job, of course, was difficult. At every interview, she was politely refused. "Age, I'm sorry, we have a young team," or even simpler, "Will you be on sick leave? You have a line to the doctor, the hospital, the dispensary, and we pay you." It was offensive to hear this, so she decided not to waste time. She called her previous place of work, talked to young people, and learned that it was possible to earn money from home. Emily decided to keep up with life and continued to work, but already, as they say now, on a remote.
And why not? For an experienced accountant, this is a very good opportunity. Of course, she was going to tell Brian about it. She wanted to brag about her success, but then she realized, no, it was too soon to share the news. It was better to keep quiet for now. Something told her that her son hadn't come for nothing, but for some very specific reason that he wasn't telling her about. And if that was the case, it would be wise for her to wait with revelations for the time being. She didn't say that it had been 5 years since love had come into her life.
Although it would be more accurate to say, returned. She and Ethan had known each other for a long time, since high school. Emily, then just Em, studied in a parallel class with Ethan, and every time she met the blue-eyed handsome boy in the school corridors, she felt her heart sink. Emily had never dreamed of the attention of such a guy, who was secretly admired by half of the high school girls. Ethan could choose any girl he wanted, and there were smart girls who were going for a gold medal, or at least a silver medal. There were also beautiful ones. Take Sarah Johnson. Oh, what a girl she was. Tall, statuesque, with a thick blonde braid below her knees, black eyes like an Italian mother, and what eyelashes, dark, thick, with a beautiful curve. When she lowered her eyes, the shadow of these luxurious eyelashes fell in a semicircle on her cheeks. And besides the smart and pretty ones, there were also the talented ones. Laura, who could sketch a portrait of anyone in 5 minutes. Kate was a local celebrity who played in all the school plays. Emily, on the other hand, was just an ordinary girl. She studied easily, moderately hard, but she was never an honors student, nor did she want to be. No one would call Emily a beauty, but not a dunce either, so pretty, no more than that. And Emily didn't have any creative ability. No, she had nothing to attract attention, and she didn't need to. There were plenty of other girls. She thought Ethan didn't even notice her. But one mysterious incident changed everything. Once, when she returned in the early spring morning, Emily found on her windowsill a fresh branch of lilacs, still in dew. The lilacs were large, beautiful, and smelled so intoxicating that she could hold them in her hands all day long. When Emily looked out the window, she saw no one, and then she had to pack up and run to school. So the incident slipped her mind pretty quickly. But the next morning it happened again. An open window and a fragrant branch. What's the mystery? No one around. On the way to school, Emily thought that boys were strange creatures after all. But what was the point of all those flowers if it wasn't clear who was giving them? At least this mysterious admirer would write a note. Otherwise, you want to come up. Thank you. But to whom? There were still 10 minutes before the beginning of classes, and in the schoolyard reigned the usual fun bustle. Friends were saying hello to each other. Someone sitting on the porch was hurriedly finishing his homework. A little farther away, at the fence, Emily saw Ethan, surrounded by a flock of girls. They were smart and beautiful, and even talented, and all of them, interrupting each other, talked about the approaching graduation. Ethan didn't take part in the discussion, but let the girls talk. Emily stopped nearby, pretending to look for something in her briefcase. It's spring, exams are coming up, and our graduation will be there, Kate sighed suddenly, and we'll go our separate ways. Maybe we'll never see each other again. I'm going to New York. I want to go to acting school. You, Ethan, into the army. Jessica's going to New York too. Why don't we go together? No way, the other one replied. Personally, I'm staying here. I'll get married. A woman, if she's beautiful, has no reason to hustle. To work. Kate bit her lip resentfully, and the other girls giggled. She never missed an opportunity to emphasize who was the first beauty here, and at the same time to humiliate the competitors. So the crowd was happy that this time it was not them. Well, if there are no other talents than beauty, then the best thing to do is to get married, Kate thought. Who are you going to marry? Well, see, then I have no one to marry. You'd better tell me what dress I should wear to the prom. Blue or lilac, Ethan said suddenly, and looked at Emily intently. Yeah, I really like lilac. Emily shuddered, blood rushing to her face, and, agonizingly afraid of blushing, she hurried off to class. Now that so many years had passed, Emily sometimes asked herself, why did she get so embarrassed? Why? Wasn't it hard to at least smile at a guy in love? After all, he was probably expecting it. But to her, raised in modesty, it seemed that the handsome Ethan just decided to make a joke on an unattractive girl. And when 40 years later they met quite by chance, being in the same checkout line at the store, Ethan, remembering the past, admitted, "Remember when I said about the lilacs?" Well, of course I remember. Only I couldn't have imagined that you did. Silly Ethan reproached himself without malice. I should have approached you myself, and I was shy, walking in circles, and you blushed so much. It was immediately clear to me that you guessed. I thought that since you ran away so quickly, it means that you didn't like me. No, Ethan, just the opposite. Really, you thought that, didn't you? You know, I really wanted to try my luck again at the prom, to ask you to dance, to ask you directly. But you didn't come to the prom. I did, Emily confessed embarrassedly. I got chicken pox right before prom. You know, there was no way I was going to make it. Oh, I was so upset. It's funny to remember now. But then I looked at my new dress, and I cried. I roared until my mom took it out of my sight. She looked with a smile at this grown-up man, but so touching in his memories of his first love. How little did you know about girls, Ethan? And here I thought you were a sophisticated young man, a womanizer by then. Yes, he laughed, and I wasn't. But the girls were after you, and they were after you big time, and don't deny it. I've seen it all, I did, Ethan agreed, but I didn't need them. I was in love with you. I guess I should have been more decisive. Oh, what the hell. Listen, I invite you to visit. You don't have to be jealous. My wife won't be here. I mean, we're, almost classmates. Let's go. I agree, Emily replied. Besides, there's no one to be jealous of. I separated from my husband a long time ago. Ethan took her bags and shook his head, and I was too embarrassed to ask why you were carrying such heavy things yourself. And it turns out, too bad you don't. I was sure you'd be able to build a strong, happy family. I can't tell you how happy I was when my husband finally left. Ethan stopped and looked at her confused. Happy? You were happy? Very, Emily laughed. You know, better no husband than a drinking, philandering one. And the worst of it was that I wouldn't have left him myself. You haven't forgotten how we were brought up, have you? It was a shame to get divorced. If we got married, we had to live together. So we lived together. And then there was such happiness. He found someone else and went to her, and I'm free. You wouldn't believe it. Ethan, I danced all over the apartment that day. And then I baked a cake and sat in front of the TV and cut myself a huge piece. I sat on the couch, eating, and some comedy was on, I remember. And this feeling that I don't have to agree anymore, that I don't have to wiggle my way through the evening, to understand, to justify. Oh, that was a relief, Ethan, and I promised myself that I would never take my husband back. And he begged and begged. But I'd already tasted freedom once.
You always knew how to surprise me, Emily, he said.
And you know, I'm happy you haven't changed, she replied. He helped her carry her bags all the way to her apartment, and then they just sat in the kitchen, drinking flavored tea and talking. They had a lot to tell each other about all the untold things of their youth and what came afterward, so imperceptibly, without noise and a stormy boil of passions, in Emily's life came love. It was the love of two adults, many experienced people, care for each other, respect and warmth. That's what their relationship consisted of, and Emily often thought that nothing better than that had ever happened to her. But Brian didn't know anything about it yet, and would he? She had a sudden urge to call Ethan right now, to talk to him, to hear his voice. But it was nighttime. There wouldn't be a man. With a sigh, Emily rolled over onto her side, closed her eyes, and began counting sheep like a child. Early in the morning, Brian found his mother in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, wrapped in a shawl, absent-mindedly stirring her tea. Seeing her son, Emily smiled. Something's been keeping me awake. You started to tell me yesterday that you were in some kind of trouble, but somehow you never finished. Brian sat up and poured himself some tea as well. Trouble. That's putting it mildly, he said with a heavy sigh. In fact, I'm in what you might call a disaster. Everything I've worked for so many years has gone to waste. He raised inflamed eyes to his mother. Everything, you know? My business just got eaten up by the competition. Bandits? Emily asked fearfully.
No, the recession. Those businessmen with their online stores who started slashing prices, that That's how they tore everything down.
I can't. They can, but I can't. They don't have rent for retail space. They don't have such expenses for utilities. They don't have to pay the vendors. And you, can't you go online like them? I can. But I have to pay off my debts first. And I don't have any money. I've already sold everything I can get my hands on. Oh, Brian's mother was shocked into silence. Sure, Brian was far from a perfect son, but he was still a son. She felt sorry for him. He'd worked for so many years, never been home, never had a family of his own, and to be left with nothing in one fell swoop. I'll get out, he said firmly.
I'll get out. But you've got to help me, you know. I need to get this apartment vacated, and the summer house too. Then I can put some money into renovations and rent out both. That'll keep me going. And then I'll find a job. But right now, holding on is the most important thing. You see, Mom's confused. She's not the same anymore, Brian said.
Where am I supposed to go? How am I going to get you out of your apartment? Emily asked. I've already thought of that, he answered so quickly that there was no doubt. He had indeed thought of everything. We'll put you in a nursing home. Temporarily, until I'm up again. In the meantime, you'll have to live there. Why? They'll feed you, and the doctors will look after you. So you won't even have to go to the clinic, and you won't have to socialize with just anyone, but with quite decent people. But I'll visit. How can you? And then when this black streak is over, I'll take you away. Well, you know, Brian. Emily stood up and wrapped her shawl more tightly. I didn't expect this from you. What did you expect? He asked dejectedly. That I'd go back to my native land and go to work as a janitor. I'd rather be a janitor than put my mother in an almshouse. There you go again. He struck the table with his fist in annoyance. What almshouse? A normal institution for the elderly. It's not like I'm throwing you out on the street. After all, why don't you help your son? You haven't shown your face around here in 20 years, and now all of a sudden you remember you're a son. No, Brian, you can't expect that kind of help from me, and I don't want to hear any of it. But Mom, he tried to put a childishly whimsical note in his voice. Not for long. Just for a couple months, and then I'll take you away. That's right. Emily turned away from the window, and the sunny spring day suddenly seemed gray and dirty, as if a child had been painting with watercolors and then spilled water from a glass on the fresh drawing. So that was why Brian had come, to put his mother in a nursing home, and to take possession of the cottage and provide himself with the standard of living to which he was accustomed. Again the old remorse woke up and clawed at her heart. It is my fault. I put up with a worthless husband because of stupid conventions and made my son put up with it. Every day he saw his own father despised and hated by everyone but the bottle. I should have gotten a divorce. I should have. What did Brian grow up to be? Exactly like his dad. The only difference is that to his father all that mattered was the booze. But to Brian nothing matters but money. Suddenly she felt disgusted with herself, weak and unable to transcend the rules no one wanted, afraid of being judged. Who would judge her? Neighborhood gossipers, colleagues at work. But after all, she could trade the apartment and move out of here, and she could quit her job and find another one. Maybe I deserve all this, Emily thought. And now she was paying for what she'd done. Where are you going to live yourself? She asked. I'll rent a doghouse, but that'll do for a while. And we'll see. She nodded. Then silently she left the kitchen and went to her room to pack. Not much junk, Brian said, taking the suitcase from her. He picked it up and shook it gently. Clearly the suitcase was half empty. Only things that are truly dear to me are in there, Mother said. Old photographs, letters, and a few favorite books. The rest is yours to dispose of as you wish. A cab pulled up to the house, and Brian took Emily's hand. "Well, get settled in." "Let me give you a hand." He himself settled into the front seat, nodded nonchalantly to the driver. "You know the Hope Nursing Home?" "Drive there." Emily stared out the window without looking away. They were met at the entrance by a smiling person. "Good afternoon. I'll show you to your room." "You show me," Brian said impatiently, and tossed his suitcase to his mother. "And I have business to attend to." "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." He walked quickly back to the waiting car. It worked. It all worked. His heart sang joyfully. For the time being, he would rent out his mother's Dacha, and in a couple of months he would talk to her so that she would reissue everything to him. And then he would go up again, sell it, and be able to invest the money in business. Just 2 or 3 months to wait. Just nothing. And it's better to get a job now. Then the money from the rent will be able to save. By the way, the job was the easiest. He had already had time to look through the vacancies and sent responses to a couple of good places. Everything had worked out fine. "Let's go back now," he commanded the cabbie, "and make it quick. I'm getting hungry." He wasn't lying. Indeed, for the first time in the few days he had spent in his hometown, he felt a beastly appetite. Until today, he'd had trouble forcing himself to eat anything. Now he would eat it in one sitting without choking on it. It was getting hotter and hotter outside. Brian was glad to expose his face to the sun's gentle rays. It felt good. Emily sat on the bed in her new home and looked sadly at her surroundings. The bare walls were neatly painted a pastel pink color, but there were no pictures, no vase with a flower, and there were no curtains on the windows, blinds. The bed is made almost like a soldier's, a blanket, a plaid, a pillow in a corner. There's a desk by the window. There's a nightstand by the bed, clean, pleasant. A cozy place for those who have nowhere else to go. She pulled out her cell phone and called the one person who still cared about her. "Ethan." Ethan cheered. "I was just about to call you myself. Do you want to go to a movie?" "I'll be busy until 6, and I can pick you up by 7:30. "No," she begged. "You don't have to pick me up. You see, I've moved here where at this hour," Ethan wondered. "Emily, please don't speak in riddles."
"Explain where you moved to and why," she said. Emily felt a lump come up to her throat and barely managed to swallow it. "Brian's here. He's lost all his money. He needs an apartment to rent out, and I
see," Ethan hissed. "Give me the address. I'll be there soon." "Ethan, don't." "The address, Emily."
"I can find out myself, but it will be longer."
"All right, write it down."
Ethan arrived an hour after the call.
"Why didn't you tell me everything right away?" he asked. "Why didn't you call right away, before you even got here?" Emily lowered her eyes. "I was so embarrassed." "Ethan, what would I have told you? That my son kicked me out of the house. I don't know why he acted like a scoundrel, and I'm ashamed for some reason." She took his hand. "Listen to me and try to understand. I'm very sorry for him. I couldn't make up my mind to get a divorce, and that's how it came about. Brian didn't have a good example in front of him, only a bad one. I felt like I had to keep my family together so Brian wouldn't grow up without a father. I didn't realize at the time that I would rather have no father than a father like that. And now I'm paying the price for that indecision. It's my fault my son grew up like this." He was silent for a moment, pulling Emily's head to his shoulder. "I don't think that's true," he said. "No matter how hard you try, you can't be a perfect parent. Everyone makes mistakes, but when you become an adult, you have to raise yourself. You can't put everything on your parents, and you can't take all the blame. Brian's a big boy, and I wish I'd never gotten him. I would never have let him send you here. And I'm not going to let you stay here. This is a place for lonely people with no one to take care of them. You're not alone, you have me. Pack up, we're leaving now." "But where to?" "I don't have a home. I have nowhere to go."
"What do you mean, where?" To me, of course, he looked at his beloved with a definite reproach. Emily, for 5 years I've been begging you to be my wife, and you've resisted. Well, I hope that at least now you will not object. Eh? Or are you going to look for reasons again?
I can't do that, she sighed. But how can we live together? We're not married yet. When she saw the man's eyes widen in amazement, she laughed merrily.
Brian was almost happy. He had been invited to an interview at a great place, perhaps the best place in this city. A large marketing agency. There are always great prospects there, and besides, he was a good fit for them. His knowledge of the field is expert, to say the least. As a marketer, he's a genius. He may have lost one business, but he did not give up and built a clear plan, and most importantly, he found the money for its realization.
That's, talent. Talent. The interview was scheduled for 11:00, but already from 07:00 Brian had not found a place. When was the last time I was this anxious, he asked himself, but he couldn't remember. Even before his first date in his life, he had been almost calm, well, a little shy, but certainly not this much excitement, although of course it's understandable. A date is just a date. A lot depends on the results of the interview, maybe even everything. Of course, there are other vacancies, and sooner or later he will get a job somewhere. But he wanted this agency, a solid position, high salary, and with all the new opportunities. After all, had he spent so much time building his own business for nothing? And not somewhere, but in the capital, where competition and for every meter of space sharks so much that only have time to dodge. And he'd been dodging for 2 decades. Humming, Brian tied his tie and once again meticulously assessed his appearance in the mirror. Everything was fine. Except that he'd fluffed his hair a little, giving himself a little deliberate carelessness. It's only the small clerks who always walk around polished, as if their wives had combed their hair an hour before they went out, like Don Corleone. A really serious man doesn't need such nonsense. Everything was perfect now. The office was right in the center of town, and Brian, finding himself in a bustling, crowded street, experienced a new burst of energy, just like in the capital. He loved its frenzied rhythm, life at breakneck speed. I miss it, he thought. Nothing. Soon, very soon, all this will be over. All this mess. And he could finally go back to where he felt good. He didn't call his mother on purpose. Let her miss him more. Then there would be a better chance that she wouldn't be stubborn and would be more willing to sign all the papers. True, Emily hadn't called him either. But Brian put that down to a simple resentment. It's a well-known fact. Women first get offended. And then, when they realize that no one is going to ask for their forgiveness, they get bored. So don't interfere with this process. I'm here for an interview, Brian informed the girl at the reception desk. My name is... I know, she smiled broadly. You're the only suitable applicant so far. Come on in.
They went up to the second floor.
I like your place already, Brian said, looking around. Beautiful renovations, lots of colors, and the location is great. It's a policy of our management, she replied. Ethan Smith believes that employees should feel as good as possible at work. Otherwise, they won't be much use.
That Ethan Smith is a fool, Brian thought gloomily. If you give these employees a free hand, they'll stop working at all. But they don't forget to demand a pay raise.
By the way, the girl continued, Ethan Smith conducts all interviews personally. So now you'll meet him too. Hold on a second. Ethan Smith turned out to be an imposing man and hardly older than 60. Cheerful grandpa, Brian thought. It's true that such people have a hard time accepting new things. They like to work the old-fashioned way, but maybe we'll get along. It wouldn't take long anyway. Ethan Garcia, meanwhile, was quickly making some notes in his diary. When he saw the visitor, he looked up. "Come in, take a chair, have a seat." "Thank you."
So I've reviewed your resume. And overall I like it, but there are a few questions.
"Please ask," Brian smiled.
Well, okay, let's get started. You were the owner of your own business in New York City. Here you have it stated here that it lasted for quite a while. What changed?
"Some financial difficulties due to the recession. Debts, but I'm going to repay them little by little." "I see. So why did you suddenly decide to move to our city? Why didn't you stay in the metropolis? After all, you probably have connections there and a better chance of getting a high-paying job than in the provinces."
Brian gritted his teeth. What an intractable old man, he thought.
"I had to sell off all my possessions to pay off my debts," he said. "So it's all very trivial. I just don't have a place to live in Norway."
Do you have any relatives here?
"Yes, my mother. She unfortunately needs special care, so she lives in a boarding house for the elderly." "That's how it is," Ethan Garcia smiled. "I was under the impression that Emily was quite an independent person." "So do you two know each other?" "And close enough. Emily is my fiancée. As for you, boy," Ethan Garcia rose from the table, "trust me, you won't get a job in this town. And I wouldn't advise you to hope for an inheritance either. I'll make sure you puppy. Don't get any of what your mom owns and will continue to own." "How can you?" "Get away," Ethan Garcia interrupted him. "In parting, I will give you one piece of advice after all. Get out of this town and don't come back here. There's nothing here for you." That's the story. Jeffrey finished his tale. Brian drank his beer in a gulp. "I had to use my last dime to get tickets and go. Where was I supposed to go? Came back to the Big Apple, thought I'd make some money. I still had some connections after all. But what? Nothing. Don't you know the ins and outs of this town? As long as you're on top, everyone adores you and wants to be friends with you. If you lose everything, you lose your friends, your buddies first." "What's your mother?" Jeffrey asked.
Brian shrugged. I don't know. She's doing okay, I guess. Sends me a little money every once in a while. Doesn't want to talk. She's understandable."
"It's understandable. I wanted to take everything I had from her, so I'm not offended." He stood up from the cheap plastic chair and smiled. "Jeffrey, thank you, brother, for dinner. I'm gonna go." "Where are you going?" The man wanted to stop him, but restrained himself in time. What could he do? Offer Brian a place to sleep or a job to a man who had just talked without any embarrassment about sending his mother to a nursing home to take possession of her property? His own mother. And is it hard to imagine what such a man is capable of doing to a stranger, even one who would lend him a helping hand? No, you can't. It is too dangerous. "Goodbye," Brian tossed over his shoulder, heading for the exit. Jeffrey's lips trembled. "Goodbye," he whispered soundlessly.
The small assembly hall of the school was filled with students in resplendent prom dresses and fancy suits with ribbons tied. They took turns to the stage where a tall, formidable woman with a joyful smile, the principal, handed them their certificate. Next to her stood a short woman in dark glasses and a long green dress. She hugged each person who received a cherished book and cried on their shoulder. The Cynthia Wright Academic Excellence Award goes to Cynthia Wright, the headmistress said loudly into the microphone. A skinny girl in a red dress the color of her certificate, and with a long white braid, rose from the hall and made her way to the stage. She was given an award, a red certificate, and a small bunch of flowers. The girl went up to her class teacher, a woman in a long green dress. "Cynthia, darling, how happy I am for you. You have a brilliant future ahead of you. I'm sure you're clever." The woman's tears flowed again. "No, kind. purposeful, you will definitely achieve everything you want. Got it? The girl nodded and hugged her class teacher. Thank you for everything. Cynthia came down from the stage and sat down in the hall, continuing to watch the presentation of certificates. Suddenly, someone jumped up to her and whispered something in her ear. Cynthia opened her eyes wide and jumped up from her seat. She has decided to leave the child in an orphanage. Do you understand? Shouted the mother to the girl. We have to do something. Stay here. Nah, Cynthia ordered and ran towards the house. Thankfully, it was not far away. The girl ran into the house and saw her older sister, who had already packed a bag for the baby and was holding the girl in her arms. Betty, what are you going to do? You're not just going to leave this little girl at the orphanage, are you? Cynthia asked. She looked hopefully at her sister, who had gathered her long dark hair into a thick braid and was wearing a tracksuit. She didn't look like herself now. Usually a bright and majestic girl who gathered crowds of guys around her, she was now unassuming. You don't understand, Cynthia, this. The girl shook the child. It doesn't let me live normally. It drains me of my strength. It's always screaming, and I can't take it anymore. It pisses me off, makes me act like I'm not normal. Cynthia slowly approached her sister, shaking her head. It's her, not it. Don't you realize it's a child? You can't just do this to her. You can't abandon her, you can't put her in an orphanage. Do you understand? The girl said almost pitifully. Then take her for yourself. Betty raised her head. Get rid of her. Get rid of the screaming and the crying and all that. I don't want it. I don't want to hear her howl every night. Without hearing her sister's reply, Betty walked over to her and shoved the baby in, throwing her bag of belongings beside her. No, you can't leave her. Looking into the girl's big blue eyes, Cynthia said, what do you mean I can't? I can give her away. I don't care where, to you or the social services, it doesn't matter. The baby cried and Cynthia started to rock her, trying to calm her down. When the girl looked up from the baby, her sister was gone. Only a breeze blew in from the ajar door. 25 years later, the large wall clock struck 6. The thick hand showed the early hour when everyone who didn't have to get up early for work was asleep. But Rita was already standing by the cooker, preparing oatmeal porridge and scrambled eggs. Bruce didn't eat porridge. He liked eggs with bacon. His loving mother tried to make everything to his liking. Bruce and Frank had to get up early for work at 8 a.m., and Cynthia left for her job half an hour early, so they had to get up at 6 a.m. to make breakfast, iron their shirts, and walk the dog. Chappie was hanging around his mistress, wagging his tail merrily. Actually, Cynthia wasn't his owner. Gabrielle's daughter had got him for herself, but then married Ben, who was allergic to fur. Just like that, very smoothly, the poor animal moved into the small one-bedroom flat. With her chores done, Cynthia started to get ready for work. She was an ordinary school teacher who taught geography lessons in a small school. She had dreamed of traveling since childhood, but life had turned out so that she had only seen other countries in atlases and pictures in school textbooks. It took Cynthia a long time to get to work, and she traveled by bicycle because she did not have a car. In general, the family had 2 cars, one for Frank and one for Bruce. Cynthia helped to buy them. Frank was the first to get a used car for his 18th birthday, but soon his younger brother was jealous of him. The woman had to take out a loan to please her favorite son. Of course, they did not give their mother a lift to work. They had a hard day's work ahead of them, so they needed to sleep and rest. Cynthia would quietly cycle away in good weather, but in snow or rain they could take the bus. Cynthia had a best friend, the perky Kelly. They had met at school when Cynthia had applied for a job as a geography teacher after college. Kelly taught biology and often came to her friend's house to talk about life and discuss the latest news. This day was no exception. On arriving at school, Cynthia learned that the Year 11 classes were being taken away to prepare for the final bell, so she had no lesson. Kelly, who had given her rowdy 5th graders a test paper, quietly went next door to check the exam schedule. Kelly caught Cynthia checking her notebooks. Her girlfriend. Do you even rest once in a while? Cynthia lifted her big blue eyes and removed her glasses from her face. She looked at her friend with a squint and a degree of incomprehension. I didn't have time to check on the house last night. I was up late cleaning the bathroom. Then I had to wash a stain on Frank's white shirt. He really likes it. What time did you go to bed? Kelly raised an eyebrow lazily, anticipating the answer. She'd known Cynthia for years and was aware of all her household chores. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders, put aside her notebook, and stood from the table. "Tea, would you like some?" Kelly nodded. "About 2 o'clock, I guess, to be honest. I can't remember. Bruce was up late watching some really interesting film, and I couldn't sleep." Kelly rolled her eyes. "I still can't understand why you sleep in the same room with Bruce while Frank is alone. Aren't children supposed to be in the same room?" "They're not exactly kids," Kelly muttered. "Are they thinking of moving out of their mother's house? They're both well into their 3rd decade." Cynthia shook her head and remained silent. She thought such talk from her friend was utter nonsense. Kelly herself had married much later than Cynthia and had given birth to a daughter 15 years ago. It was certainly not her place to speculate about such things. "Nah. How's Gabrielle?" Kelly asked, pouring sugar into her mug. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. "No, she and John had a fight the other day. I don't know how things are going. I try to stay out of their lives, you know. She should be very grateful to you," Kelly said with a slight tilt of her head. Cynthia was the only one who understood her hint. "You're too good a mum for her." Cynthia shrugged her shoulder uncertainly, grimacing slightly. She understood what Kelly meant, and she hated that her friend had brought up such an unpleasant topic. "How's your Justin? He sent me some pictures from school recently. I'll show you." Kelly smiled and reached for her phone, which was full of pictures of her nephew from the university in the capital. Cynthia got home before her sons for the first time in a long time. Usually, she stayed up late, sitting with underperforming students or checking a mountain of notebooks. Today, she let an 8th grade boy off in honor of his birthday and left the notebooks for the next. Her daughter called and asked to meet. Gabrielle didn't see her mother often, and this was an event for Cynthia. She hurried home to make her daughter's favorite pie. Gabrielle arrived early. Cynthia had not yet had time to take the pie out of the cooker when the doorbell rang. The woman hurried to open it, trying not to trip over Chappie, who had smelled her former landlady. On the doorstep stood her tall, russet-haired daughter in a beautiful red dress. The girl smiled at her mother and threw herself around her neck, grabbing the box of chocolates more comfortably. "Mummy, I'm so happy to see you." "What smells so good?" Cynthia smiled and called into the kitchen. "Guess. Is it my favorite cherry pie?" "Mummy, you're great." The girl said enthusiastically and rushed into the kitchen, petting the dog on the way. Cynthia rushed to get the pie out of the oven before it burned. Gabrielle began to make tea. "How are you doing?" Cynthia asked, cutting into the steaming, delicious-smelling pie. Gabrielle smiled broadly and shrugged her shoulders. "No, John and I have made up. He gave me 27 roses in honor of the number of months we'd been together, and then he took me to the rooftop restaurant. You should have seen how beautiful it was." Cynthia smiled, happy for her daughter, putting the cake on the table. She sat down on a stool. Gabrielle set out several flavored mugs of tea and sat opposite. "How are Bruce and Frank? Haven't called them in a while." Cynthia shrugged, setting the pie down for herself and her daughter. "Bruce, studying. He's almost done his diploma. And Frank, I think he's got a girlfriend, but he won't tell me anything. Can you believe it? I don't even bother. He's a big boy, he's only a year and a half apart. I think he knows what he needs to do with a girl." Gabrielle laughed. Cynthia picked up on the laughter and shook her head. "You know, John and I have decided to take out a mortgage so we can have our own place. We're going to have kids soon, and it's hard to raise them in a rented flat." "So, why are you making excuses?" exclaimed the woman. "That's right. I raised you in a foreign city in a flat that didn't belong to us. So having your own flat is the right thing to do. Are you saying that to share or to get me to give you my approval?" Gabrielle set the mug down and the smile came off her lips. She looked out the window at the leg of the kitchen table and finally shifted her gaze to her mother. "Not for this. Not for that, you see. You have to make a down payment to get a mortgage. John and I don't have that kind of money right now, and I thought..." Cynthia left her cup of tea too and looked at her daughter carefully. "Do you want me to give you money?" Gabrielle shrugged her shoulders. "I know you have some. You're saving up for a holiday abroad. There's not only money for holidays, but also for a rainy day," Cynthia said slowly. The joy of her daughter's arrival had already waned, and the woman spoke with a note of sadness, foreshadowing an unpleasant conversation. "Hey, do you want me to give you the last of my savings?" "Not exactly, Mom, but how can I explain to you that we need the money? We need a place to live. As soon as John gets his bonus, we'll give you some of it back, and then..." The woman raised her hand in front of her, asking her daughter to shut up, and pressed her lips together. She hated saying no to her daughter, hated saying no to her children, but sometimes it had to be done. You haven't paid me back the money you took out for John's car almost a year ago. You promised me that you and the bonus would pay me back then too. And then it was the last of the holiday money too. Gabrielle rolled her eyes. Ma'am? Are you kidding me? You're the one who's going to remember every penny of it. Cynthia grinned bitterly and shook her head. No, I'm not remembering every penny. I'm just asking you to be a little more considerate of your mother. You didn't even come to my birthday party, forgot about my brother's graduation, and missed my grandmother's funeral. I was working. Gabrielle exclaimed. Me too, but for some reason I always came to your holidays. And even when you and John had your first fight, and you sat crying on the seafront in the rain, I took off work and came. Don't you remember that? Gabrielle looked away and pressed her lips together just as her mother had done a few minutes ago. So you won't give me any money then? Cynthia shook her head. Gabrielle jumped up from her seat, nearly dropping her chair, and rushed to the door. Thanks for your help, Mommy, the girl said, slamming the door. Lechings, the woman lowered her head, tears flowing from her eyes. She couldn't hold back any longer. Large, salty drops fell on the white tablecloth. Sobs were heard throughout the flat. Something clenched in Cynthia's chest, causing her unbearable pain. In the evening, when Cynthia had calmed down and was minding her own business, her sons returned. Mom, Bruce called out. Are you home? Cynthia answered from the kitchen. She was preparing dinner for her sons. I asked you to iron the white shirt yesterday, and you ironed the blue one. Like a fool, I went to the open house alone in blue. The woman rolled her eyes tiredly. She probably would have tolerated it another time, but after her conversation with Gabrielle, she was on edge. The white one was hanging in the wardrobe. It wasn't that hard to get it out and iron it. It would take a couple of minutes. Was it hard for you to remember my request? The boy asked capriciously and walked into the kitchen. Cynthia turned sharply in his direction and threw the towel back on the fridge. You're almost 22 years old. You're a grown-up guy. You're dating girls and looking for a prestigious job. And you're asking your mom to iron your bloody shirt? Are you going to hide behind your mom's skirt for the rest of your life? You're just like your deadbeat dad, said the woman loudly, throwing off her apron, and she walked briskly to her room. And yes, you sleep in your brother's room now. I am a grown woman, and I want to spend my free time in peace, not listening to your conversations and watching films at 2 a.m. Earthquakes are caused by the shifting of lithospheric plates. The most seismically active zones in our country are the San Andreas Fault. The largest mountain system of the continent is the Cordilleras, where the highest point, Mount Denali, is located. There is also the largest volcano, Yellowstone caldera. It is very dangerous to live there. There is a risk of earthquake or volcanic eruption. Japan is also in a seismically active zone. Shifts of lithospheric plates also cause the formation of large mountain ranges. The higher the mountain, the earlier it formed, meaning one plate moved on top of another. Cynthia spoke slowly and measuredly, twirling her pen in her hands and occasionally looking out the window. She liked to teach lessons, but sometimes she would forget her homework on purpose and teach new material without paying attention to the fussing and talking of the students. There was a reason for that now. One mind was reeling over the past day, and Cynthia couldn't figure out who was right and who was wrong. She felt she had been too harsh with the children. After all, it wasn't Bruce's fault that she had forgotten about the white shirt. Gabrielle was just starting her adult life, and she needed her parents' support. Besides, comparing her son to his father was fundamentally wrong. Cynthia was sure that she had managed to raise her sons differently from their father, who had abandoned the family when he saw the first skirt he saw. Bruce did sleep in his brother's room. In the morning, Cynthia didn't say anything to them, and, offended, went to work to check the notebooks left over from the previous day. It seemed so wrong, but a voice inside, still offended by her daughter's words, argued that Cynthia had done the right thing. The woman's musings were interrupted by the creak of the door, which slowly opened and a short, blonde-haired boy entered the study. He dropped his backpack beside his desk and sat down, grinning at the teacher. Cynthia, surprised at his insolence, stood up from her desk, towering over the 8th graders, and someone started laughing. All thoughts of home and problems with the children immediately popped into Cynthia's head. She looked at the boy, at his smirk and cheeky face, and immediately remembered her children. Remembered Gabrielle's face when she heard her mother wouldn't give her money, Bruce's face when he'd wondered not to eyeball the shirts. And the woman snapped. Henderson stood up quickly from the table. Or else what? Brazenly grinned the boy. Otherwise, your parents will be called to the school, and you'll be out of here immediately," Cynthia said sternly. She glared at the student with anger. His every movement, every sound and smirk made her hate him. What's wrong with you? Do you even know who my father is to say such a thing? You're a bloody mama's boy, Henderson. Cynthia continued, "You will leave my office immediately. Or what? You're gonna drool on the baby. You're a loser like every other teacher in this school. You work for pennies, you're unhappy with your life, you hate children, and you've been out of a man for a long time, Mrs. Cynthia." Cynthia opened her mouth and gasped with indignation. Her hands clenched into fists. She looked at the boy and saw only evil in the flesh. The woman grabbed the schoolboy's backpack with one hand, his ear with the other, and hurried to the door. She almost threw the boy into the corridor, followed by his briefcase, which hit the concrete floor and all its contents fell out. "Get out, you little rascal," she shouted. "Shove your arrogance down your throat. And don't you dare come into this office again. You nasty, brainless boy." Cynthia slammed the door angrily, just in time to see the shocked teachers standing in the corridor. The woman shifted her gaze to the children and saw the frightened looks on their faces. They looked at her with fear, huddled into their desks. Cynthia sighed and returned to her seat. The students tucked into their books. After everything that had happened, Cynthia pondered the boy's words. He had a point. The teachers at the school worked for little pay, tolerated the insolent remarks of students like him, and were not happy with their lives. Every day, Cynthia observed herself to Kelly and the other colleagues. They were all terribly tired, with lots of problems at home and at school. Some who succumbed to life's difficulties were feared by the children. Some who chose the tactic of defiance were loved by the children. The second option belonged to those teachers who happily went home, letting children go home a few lessons early, not conducting tests and talking to them on extraneous topics. Oh yeah, those kids loved them. True, then in colleges and universities screamed about not knowing English or physics. The reason was the teachers who chose their peace, but those who tried to give children knowledge were not loved, and Cynthia was one of those who tried to combine the two tactics. She meekly tolerated the attacks of students like that blonde-haired boy. Going along when kids asked to be let off early on Friday or the last day of the quarter, while still trying to teach lessons and provide knowledge, the woman never thought the day would come when her kindness would only lead to trouble. There were not many students like Henderson, but those few who took advantage of her teacher's kindness and in time became insolent. The school disliked the teachers most of all because of them and turned into nasty and strict, not compromising and wanting only to leave the hated job as soon as possible. Henderson, however, was special. His father, a local MP, had a lot of power and gave his son to a rich lyceum where such children brought everything on a platter. However, after another scandal involving the son of the mayor of a neighboring region, the deputy had to send the boy to an ordinary school to save his place. Of course, at first it was difficult for him, but soon he realized that he could trump his father's influence and actively used it. The teachers got away with it, the children were shunned, and everything was relatively peaceful until Cynthia became indignant. She was in a bad mood. On a normal day, she would probably have guffawed or gently reprimanded the boy for being late, so as not to cause trouble. But under the pressure of her own problems, she did the opposite. After class, when Cynthia was about to go home, the school radio called her to the principal's office. Those teachers who were still in the school saw the woman off down the corridor with pity. One even patted her on the shoulder. The scandal quickly spread throughout the school, and everyone from the principal to the first graders knew what had happened. Cynthia slowly walked up to the large door with the principal's sign and wanted to knock, but immediately a man came out of the office, talking on the phone. The woman immediately recognized him. His face was on half the posters in the city before the next election. She wanted to say something, but the man was gone. "Mr. Kelvin." Cynthia knocked on the open door and stepped inside. The director, a short, gray-haired old man with a bald spot on his head, sat in a high office chair, rubbing his forehead with a wrinkled hand. He raised his head at the teacher who entered and put on his half-glasses, looking at her carefully. "Mrs. Cynthia, hello." Mr. Kelvin said hello and pointed to a chair in front of the desk. Cynthia nodded and sat down. "Is this about Henderson?" Mr. Kelvin nodded. "I'm sorry, Cynthia." "Cynthia, I remember you as a girl when you came in after college with a baby in your arms. I remember everything you did for the school. But you realize we don't want any conflicts with the deputy, don't you? How did you even get that boy thrown out of your office by force? That's not like you." Cynthia lowered her head low and sighed. I'm sorry, Mr. Kelvin. It's just I'm having problems at home and a bad day. And he said that sort of thing, me. Cynthia sighed, trying to hold back tears. Mr. Kelvin held out a glass of water and shook his head. He folded his wrinkled hands on the table, squeezing their lock with force. I'd love to keep this thing quiet, Cynthia, but you have to realize that the school doesn't want any trouble with his father. We'd lose our funding and we'd be inundated with inspections. All the teachers will be sent in for performance reviews. It's easier for me to leave the school, Cynthia concluded quietly, taking a drink of water. Resentment and despair squeezed her throat, cutting off her oxygen supply. The woman was almost out of breath. The school was part of her life. She had worked there for over 20 years. The office, the children, the lessons. The notebooks all seemed so familiar it couldn't be otherwise. And now that part was being taken away from her, leaving her soul torn to shreds. I'll let you resign on your own. I'll try to keep it quiet so the details don't get out, but you know it's hard to hide. Everyone will talk, and the kids will bring other stories to their parents. If you ever want to work in a school, it won't be in our town. A pall shot over Cynthia's eyes and memories of days gone by flashed before her. She could clearly see the day she had to leave her hometown so that she and Gabriel could have a normal life. History was repeating itself. The town where she had raised 3 children, found friends, a job and colleagues, must be left. It was as if fate mocked her every time life seemed to fall into place. With a black gel pen left over from exams, Cynthia wrote her resignation letter of her own volition. A sprawling teacher's signature flaunted on the white sheet, letting the woman know that this was the end of normal life, the end of everything she had. Can I take my things back? The woman asked quietly. Mr. Kelvin nodded. Of course, Cynthia. You can come and say goodbye to your children, to your colleagues. Maybe when the kid graduates, you'll be able to come back. Thank you, Mr. Kelvin. Cynthia nodded. I'm grateful for your kindness, for everything you've done for me. When Cynthia came to work at the school, Mr. Kelvin was the head teacher and physics teacher. He took kindly to the young girl, who was not even 20 when she came to work before she had finished her studies. He helped her get on the waiting list for housing for a young family. He had let Gabrielle go when she was sick, was okay with maternity leave, and had helped the young girl in many ways. Cynthia was grateful to him for that. With a stone on her soul, Cynthia went into the study to pick up her things and a few books. Following her in was Kelly, who, only seeing her friend's hard stare, shook her head. She knew at once what had happened. Did the principal give you time to pack your things and say goodbye? Nay, he's wrong. It's not your fault what happened. That's what we all wanted to do to that underachiever. Kelly, I threw him out into the corridor. He fell on the concrete floor. Thank God he didn't hurt himself. Not only would I have been sued, but I wouldn't have been able to forgive myself. Cynthia exhaled and sat back in her seat, covering her face with her hands. The fact that they let me resign is lucky. You should be fired with a reprimand in your personnel file. Not given a free pass. Kelly walked over to her friend and hugged her lightly from behind. She rested her head on her shoulder and remained silent. The house is a mess. I had a fight with Gabrielle and Bruce. She asked me for money for the mortgage and I said no. That's what it's all about. You know, if I'd given her the money, it would have been fine. I had to buy a pole. No, it wouldn't have been fine. Kelly said sharply, they're grown-ups and they're on your back. You wouldn't be able to stand it if not now, then later and you need to start your life without them. They're your children, I understand that, but you can't give them all of yourself. You've already done too much for them, especially for... Cynthia shook her head, staring at the desk. She saw notebooks, textbooks, pens, and a newspaper. The woman grabbed it and flicked to the page with the ad. Now, look, Cynthia jabbed her finger at the small ad on the last page. There's a cabin for sale, cheap in the neighborhood. It's almost next to where my grandmother lived. She died a long time ago, but I remember being there. It's very beautiful. So buy it. I know you've got the money, and you can almost go back to your family. It's near your hometown, isn't it? Cynthia nodded. You can start a new life away from the children of deputies who don't know how to raise sons. Cynthia nodded. Do you think it would be worth it? The peace of mind. Yes. Kelly's husband, William, helped Cynthia move things into her new home. The woman packed everything up while her sons were away. She left them a little note and left, determined to start a new life. It seemed so strange. At 40+ years old, starting a new life, Kelly didn't understand her friends' worries, constantly cheering her up. The cottage was not far from Cynthia's hometown, a 40-minute bus ride away, and she could be at the cemetery where Cynthia's mother and father were buried. It was lovely, although the cottage did seem a little dilapidated. William had told them that it could be rebuilt, the roof patched, the kitchen floor redone. The gas was there, the walls were strong, even the furniture. The man shifted his gaze to the chair that had broken after Kelly had sat on it, face almost intact. "How are you doing on the money?" Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. "I've spent most of it on the house, of course, and I haven't added to the piggy bank in a while. But it's enough for the first time. Maybe I can even pay for roof repairs. Do you think it's expensive?" William scratched the back of his head and looked at the roof. "If you hire a crew, yes, you can find handymen in the village. They'll do it cheaper, but the main thing is not to hire alcoholics. They will drink more than work." And Gab grinned. "Oh no, okay, well, thank you guys. You've been a big help." Kelly waved goodbye to her friend and got into the car. She had to get to the rehearsal for the last bell. Her 9th grade class was graduating. Cynthia stepped out of the house and took a closer look around. It was small, 4 rooms, a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and hall. There was also a small porch, but it was a summer porch, and it was hard to count that as a separate room. Cynthia considered herself very lucky to have bought the house for such a small amount of money. When she asked the seller why it was so cheap, he said the village was dying out and the school might be closed soon. No one was going to buy a house there, and he had inherited it by chance from a great aunt who had died, so he didn't value it much. There was a lot of work to do to improve the house, but the woman was ready for it. She was finally alone. Cynthia spent more than 3 days cleaning the old house. On the 4th, she left the most difficult part, the attic. Admittedly, she was afraid to go up there. It didn't look secure, so she climbed up there very carefully. Plus, it was dirtier than all the other rooms. No one had clearly been in there in about 20 years. At my lights, and the woman set up the stepladder and slowly climbed up to the trapdoor in the ceiling. She almost fell in, but when she got to the top, she realized there was more work than she thought. In the attic were many boxes and old chests where women had stored their belongings. Cynthia decided to start sorting through the boxes to throw away anything she didn't need. Rolling up her sleeves, she sighed and sat down on the dusty floor. The first 3 boxes were women's things. The 4th contained children's toys. Cynthia took them apart at first, winding up dolls and wiping dusty cars, but then gave up the futile endeavor and left the box. Another one contained albums of photographs. Cynthia flipped through them, marveling at the happiness of the people in the pictures, and set them aside. The farthest box was small and light. Cynthia opened it and aghast. On the very top was a wooden frame that held a picture of her sister and a strange guy. They were hugging and looking happily into the camera lens. Cynthia wrapped her shaking hands around the photograph. Betty. The girl looked exactly as Cynthia remembered her. Thick black hair, dark eyes, sharp facial features, and a narrow nose. The woman hadn't seen her sister in over 25 years. She was sure she was dead. Seeing a picture of Betty happy seemed very strange and brought bitterness to her soul. Cynthia pulled out the frame and saw a small wooden box with the letter B carved on it. The woman opened it and saw a small pendant box in the shape of a scarab beetle. Betty's pendant. Underneath, it was another picture. This one had just a guy in uniform. The year was written on the other side. The woman gasped in surprise, the year of the girl's birth. The man smiled. A letter lay next to it. Cynthia unfolded it and smiled, starting to read the lines. "Smegya Betty. I am writing to you, hoping to get a reply. You haven't answered in so long that I was afraid for you. What if something has happened to you? Grandma should be visiting soon. I hope you'll be with her. I missed your hair the color of night and your piercing eyes that looked straight into my soul. I can't live without the touch of your velvet skin. A day without you is agony, and I haven't seen you in 5 months. I miss our moonlit lunches and long late-night conversations. I hope all is well with you. Your loving." Cynthia sighed sadly. This seemed to be the baby's father. There were others under that envelope. With each letter, Jerry grew more and more desperate. He wrote that he missed her and couldn't be without Betty. In the last letter, he wrote that his grandmother had told him everything. "No, she was not too long ago and told me that you had gone to your house and never came back. I have no idea what happened. You probably found someone else, richer or prettier, I don't know. I hope you're happy. In case you're wondering, I've decided to stay in the army on a contract. You probably won't read this. I don't know your new address, so I'm writing to my grandmother's address. Jerry seemed to really love Betty, but she wasn't looking for love. She was looking for something else. Cynthia went downstairs. She didn't want to read any more letters. It bored her. She felt sorry for Jerry. He had written such beautiful lines to Betty, and Betty was herself all the years as the older sister. She had acted as if she were a couple of years younger than Cynthia. Back then, the still young girl had to sort out her problems and hide their consequences from her ailing father. If anything happened to Betty, everyone ran to Cynthia, and she dealt with all the problems. Broken windows, missing money from her father's stash, late returns, and more. Betty never thought about the feelings of others. Jerry was no exception. Cynthia cooked potatoes and cucumbers she'd bought from her neighbor's grandmother on the old, greasy cooker and sat down to dinner. The food wouldn't go down her throat, however. She looked at the seemingly appetizing potatoes and could not swallow a bite. Everything seemed bland and tasteless. The reason for this was thoughts of her sister. The woman had not seen her sister for over 25 years. She didn't even know if Betty was alive, and now her conscience was beginning to torment her. Betty was a sister, no matter what, so she couldn't just abandon her. "We have to find her," Cynthia said firmly and took a bite of cucumber. A clear plan formed in Cynthia's mind. She saw no obstacle to finding her sister. The letters had stirred her soul. The next morning, Cynthia went upstairs, going through the boxes looking for something that might help find Betty. There was nothing in the letters. However, at the deepest depths lay an old notebook with many numbers and addresses in it. The numbers were probably invalid. It had been so long, but the addresses could be verified. Cynthia could safely say that the book belonged to her sister. Betty's crooked handwriting she could recognize from 1000. She had sprawling letters and long curves. At the very end of the book was the girl's name, Donna Smith. Next to the name it said, "Call for help." Betty had a habit of signing everything she could so she wouldn't forget. She always carried a notebook with her and wrote in it the names of suitors and the places and times she met them so she wouldn't get them mixed up. Cynthia had laughed off this habit, but now realized it wasn't such a bad thing. Cynthia tore out the sheet and stuffed it in her pocket. Sure, it had been a while, but maybe this Donna could help. The woman finished all the chores at home, asked her neighbors for the best bus ride to the address that was in the book, and scheduled a meeting. She left early the next day. Cynthia was glad to be back in her hometown, to walk through places familiar from her childhood, and to remember the past. The woman walked past the school and smiled. She saw the windows of her class. She remembered her graduation. She was prophesied to have a successful future. Cynthia knew the university she would enter. She had been preparing for the exams for a long time, and then what happened happened. The house that was in the notebook was on the very outskirts of the city. It was the neighborhood where the poorest lived. In Cynthia's class, only 2 people were from that neighborhood. They walked around in bad clothes and often with bruises. Both of them left after 9th grade and moved into the dormitory. Cynthia hoped their lives were better than they had been in high school. The basement where Donna's flat was supposed to be was empty with no door. Cynthia slowly stepped inside, looking around cautiously. "First, we'll put it up soon." A man smoking on a bench said in a hoarse voice. He smelled foul, probably of booze and cheap cigarettes. Cynthia smiled with a nod and walked inside before the man said anything else. In the entryway, the smell was the same as the man's. True, there was the added scent of urine as well. The woman sighed and headed for the 3rd floor. There, she surmised, was the room she was looking for. There was no lift, of course. Flat number 11 was on the 3rd floor. It had a large metal door with obscene writing scratched on it. The bell was pushed through the wall. Cynthia pressed it and gently removed her hand. There was no telling if it worked or not. A moment later, Cynthia heard heavy footsteps outside the door. Someone was walking towards the door and grumbling under their breath. "Who has come in there?" the woman asked and opened the door. The woman was tall, full, with thin hair pulled back with a scratched hairpin, wearing a drab dressing gown and a grease stain on her chest. Cynthia smiled. "Hello, Donna Smith. Depends what for." The woman stretched out, looking around her. "You see, I'm looking for my sister. Her name is Betty. She wrote your address in her notebook." The woman made an incomprehensible rumbling sound and laughed. "Betty, I haven't heard from her in years. I owed her a favor, so I helped her about 30 years ago, maybe less." "When was the last time you saw her?" Donna shrugged. "I'm telling you 30 years ago, no 25. The neighbor's boy was born then. His mom was screaming when she went into labor that day. We just celebrated his 25th birthday. What did she want? Where did she go? She came running and all hell broke loose. She asked me to help her find a place to live, but I gave her the number of a friend who rented a room in a communal flat in the region. She took it and ran away. Can you give me the address? Donna grinned and held out her hand. We don't give out information for free. Cynthia rolled her eyes but reached into her purse. Pulling out a 3-note note, she handed it to the woman and tilted her head. Donna went back into the house, tore a small scrap off the wall calendar, and wrote an address on it in scrawled handwriting. There you go, Snow White. But there's nothing for you there. Shrugged her shoulders. No. Why not? I heard she got married, so I don't think she's been this dump in years. Cynthia had been told that phrase too often lately. So she grimaced, snatched the paper with the address out of the woman's hand, and walked away. Name. Thank you, Cynthia mumbled politely. After being in that entrance, she wanted to wash up, so she went home. She had time to go to the address. The next day, Cynthia went to the school to ask about the vacancy. She had no intention of going home. Of course, the kids called her, but she didn't answer. That's what Kelly had said. Her opinion was one the woman usually listened to. Of course, it was heavy on her heart that she hadn't answered her sons. However, for the first time in a long time, the woman felt free. The school was small, 2 stories high, windows open everywhere. May was hot, and children with watering cans were running around outside. Next to them was a short woman with white hair and a long skirt. She was giving directions and periodically approached the girls who were planting flowers. No, Cooper, haven't you ever planted flowers before? What is this? You should have covered it all the way with. Cynthia chuckled softly and walked over to the woman. Excuse me. Could you tell me where the principal's office is? Or good afternoon. The teacher smiled. Are you someone's mom? Oh, no. Cynthia shook her head. My children are grown up. I moved to your village recently and I need a job. I thought you might have something here. Are you a geographer by training? Oh, we've got a vacancy for a geographer, but you might find something, Mrs. Camille. Ground floor, 3rd office, go in and walk straight ahead. Her door's on the left. Don't miss it. Cynthia nodded gratefully and went into the school. The headmistress' door was indeed where the woman had said. Cynthia knocked. A thud was heard. Come in, mate. Hello, my name is Cynthia. I'm a geography teacher. I just moved here and I need a job. Mrs. Camila nodded hello and smiled broadly. My name is Mrs. Camila. I'm the principal. Have a seat, tea, coffee. Cynthia shook her head and sat down. The geographer's seat is unfortunately taken. But we have a vacant place for a teacher of technology, drawing, and Russian. Russian you will hardly agree to teach. Cynthia nodded. I think there's a technology class there, don't they? That was Mrs. Brooke. She's a biologist. She's working 2 jobs. She's not doing any more. She teaches everyone's biology too. Classroom management. She's also the head teacher. It's a lot of work. Then I could take the place of the technology teacher. Cynthia smiled. Would you mind? Mrs. Camila shook her head. There's no point in signing you up now. Let's start with the new school year, but you probably need a job right now, don't you? That would be nice. Cynthia grinned, remembering how much money she had left in her account. We're short a teacher at the day camp in July. Agreed. Cynthia nodded. Mrs. Camila brightened up and took a blank sheet of paper out of her desk and wrote something on it. You will collect the list of documents, pass the commission, and you can come and I will register you. You're just in time, you should know, Cynthia. They're going to close our school, you see. Not enough students, not enough teachers. No, they don't. And new people are coming to the village. Cynthia smiled. Yes, it's very beautiful here. Yes. If it's no secret, where did you move to? The 15th house on Okyabrskaya Street, Rita replied. Mrs. Anna's house, we remember her. She had no children of her own, but she always had a house full of children. Her nephews used to come. She'd invite the village children and give them all a treat. She was a kind woman. Rest in peace. Do you remember if she had a girl living here? About 25 years ago, tall, black hair, big eyes, and Betty. I remember her. She was Jerry's fiancée, Mrs. Ann's nephew. She was a strange girl. I never liked her. I was a bit older myself then. She was like, I don't know. What's your point? Inside time, the photos in the attic. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders and got up from her chair. Thanks for your help, Mrs. Camila. I'll go and collect the papers. Cynthia, cheerful, walked out of school and headed home. She has a home, she almost has a job, and maybe soon she will find her sister. Suddenly something prickled inside, as if warning her, but the woman paid no attention. She only smiled at the sight of children running around the schoolyard. The house at the address Donna had given was the same as her own, except there was a door in the entrance. On a bench sat the exact same man as the one outside Donna's house. He was smoking a cigarette and looking mockingly at Cynthia. The woman shivered and headed inside. The flat was on the 5th floor. Cynthia climbed the stairs, the soles of her new trainers sticking to them, and saw a door with 4 bells next to it. The woman was confused and rang the first one, and a few seconds later someone opened the door. "I'm not buying anything," an old woman's voice squeaked out. "I'm not selling. My name is Cynthia. I'm looking for Betty Wright. Doesn't she live here?" "Betty, what do you want her for?" The old woman asked suspiciously. "I'm her sister." "She doesn't have any sisters. I lived here before her. She never had any sisters." "Why don't you call her?" Cynthia asked irritably. "Aunt Emily, how long are you going to hug the door?" Came a loud female voice. "And this is for you." The old woman said snidely and ducked back in, slamming the door shut. Cynthia stared shocked at the closed door. A few seconds later, it swung open again. "Who's there, Cynthia?" A woman with short black hair, dark brown eyes, and plump pink lips appeared on the doorstep. The woman stood in a silk dressing gown and shocked, staring in front of her. "Betty." Cynthia couldn't bear to look at her sister. For the first time in ages, she realized she had done wrong. She shouldn't have let Betty go. She should have stopped and helped her. Then things would have been different. "Grace, come in. Are you all right?" Cynthia followed Betty into the old-smelling flat. The woman took her sister into a small, cozily furnished room with light wallpaper and a small bed. "Sit down. Do you want tea?" Without waiting for an answer, Betty poured tea from behind the teapot into a cup and retreated to the kitchen. Cynthia began to look at her sister's room. Light floral wallpaper, transparent tulle on the windows, a small dressing table with a shaped mirror and a pile of jars in front of it, a small, evenly made bed with a teddy bear on it. There were lilacs on the window and a fluffy rug on the floor. The room looked well kept and not... To be honest, it wasn't how Cynthia had imagined rooms in a communal apartment. Betty returned a minute later with 2 cups of delicious-smelling tea. 1 cup she set in front of her sister, the other she took for herself. "I won't offer you anything sweet for my figure," Betty said, running her hand over her waist and grinning. Cynthia smiled. "So how did you end up here?" "By chance, I bought a house and found pictures of you in the attic, so I thought I'd look you up. Your friend, Donna, told me where to find you." "Donna Pampuchetti, huh? I haven't heard from her in 100 years. Well, good of you to come. How are you doing? Married, I suppose?" Cynthia shrugged her shoulder vaguely. "I went out, yes, I came back in quickly. He left me for a mistress. When my eldest son was 10, son." "How many children do you have?" Betty asked interestedly. "Me, 3. Cynthia smiled. 2 boys and a girl. "They're grown up, living on their own." Betty clapped her hands with joy and said she had never doubted her sister. "I married a rich man. I thought I was doing well, but he soon swapped me for a young girl. At least he left me some money. I had a chance to buy this room back. I lived here, renting from a neighbor, and then I got married. I thought I'd never come back. But then life turned round." "Cynthia, listen, I hate to ask, but how is Anessa?" Cynthia frowned. She didn't know what she was talking about. "My daughter, she must have been brought up by her mom or by you." "You gave her away?" "Yes, she's not." "No, she's fine. We didn't give her away." Cynthia had a bad feeling and didn't want to tell her sister about her daughter's upbringing. She didn't understand why she had such thoughts in her head, but she didn't want to. "All right, well, how are Mom and Dad doing?" Cynthia looked away and pressed her lips together. "Dad got worse after you left and left us soon after. And Mom died 4 years ago of a heart attack. I'll give you the address of the cemetery. It's not that far." Cynthia sighed. "I don't understand how in all these years you've never met Mom. I moved to the next town over." Betty shrugged her shoulders. She seemed so friendly that Cynthia couldn't believe she was her sister. Of course, it had been so many years, and she was even glad if Betty had her head on straight. But it was strange talking to her after everything that had happened between them. "Betty, I found pictures of you and Jerry in the attic. There were letters too, and I'm sorry, but I read them and I don't understand why it happened between you and Jerry. Why did you leave him?" The woman lowered her head and covered her face with her hands. She looked like she was going to cry. She was breathing hard. "I was a fool then, Cynthia. A fool. He loved me for real and I fell for the money. When I got pregnant with Inessa, I thought it was the end of everything. He was going to be in the army. I'd have to follow him and the baby around. I didn't want that. I dreamed of a rich life of happiness and freedom, and here was a child. I didn't have time to get rid of it. I had to give birth. And then I fell in love with him. Rich, handsome, tall. He promised to take me with him. So I decided to give Inessa away. What can I say? I was a fool. There wasn't a day I didn't regret it. Do you think she'll forgive me? Cynthia listened to her sister with bated breath, and then she opened her eyes wide and was silent for a few seconds. No, she has a family, and she doesn't know that her mother is not her own. The frightened Cynthia said, "It's better not to spoil the girl's life, not to make her quarrel with her mother. She has a good life," and Betty sides. "Now, I understand, Cynthia. Thank you for telling me. At least I don't have to worry about my daughter now. My spirits are in place. I wish I could find Jerry. I've been thinking about him lately too. He's in his 5th decade. My health's failing. I live in a shithole. I work in a shop. So I've been having these thoughts I don't even know what to think about. I've been thinking about you and Mom and Dad and Inessa and Jerry. You must have been very upset when tears came to her eyes, and she stopped talking. I'm sorry, Cynthia. I came to see my sister and she's complaining about her life. You'd say nothing's changed in years." Cynthia shook her head and walked over to Betty, wrapping her arms around her. "It's all right, Betty. I've found you now. I live near here. You can come round." "It's okay." Betty hugged her sister and sobbed even more. "One more thing, I can help you find Jerry. I bought a house from a relative of his, so in theory," Betty pulled away from her sister and looked at her with eyes shining with hope. "Really? Cynthia, you're not joking?" "No, of course I'm not joking about it, but are you sure you want to? What if he's already married and has a family?" Betty waved her hand. "I just want to apologize to him for everything. And you too, Cynthia. Thank you. You're the best." Betty's long, thin arms picked Cynthia up and squeezed her so tightly that she could hardly breathe. Cynthia returned home, happy to see her sister. She was shocked by Betty's changes and felt bitter that she had lied to her. After all, Betty had simply made a foolish mistake in her youth. She shouldn't have to pay for it all her life. It seemed very wrong. However, she could not explain the reason why Cynthia had not spoken of Gabrielle. It was instinctive. After dinner, Cynthia pulled her phone out of her bag and saw several missed calls from the children. The woman pressed her lips together and sighed. She missed them, constantly thinking about how Bruce and Frank were doing without her. How was Gabrielle doing? Cynthia resolutely dialed her second son's number. "Hello, Mum." Bruce asked loudly into the receiver. "Frank, come here." "Mum's on the phone, Mum. Why aren't you saying anything? Is everything all right?" Cynthia sobbed. "Oh, Bruce, everything is fine, my golden one. Are you all right in there?" "I'm fine, Mum." Cynthia heard the voice of her eldest son. "Where did you disappear to?" "Neither we nor Gabrielle said anything. She told us about what happened between you two. She was wrong. And Kelly told us about the job. We're sorry. Is that why you left?" The woman shook her head and then answered out loud, remembering that the boys couldn't see her. "No, it wasn't because of that." "Are you guys living well there? Is Gabrielle okay?" "Yes, Mom, it's fine. Come back. We miss you." "Me too, boys, but I can't yet. Sorry." The woman whispered and dropped the call. It became even heavier on her heart. She had never been separated from her children. After calming down, Cynthia dialed the number of the guy she bought the house from. She hoped the guy knew Jerry's address or phone number. He did know, but only the place of employment. Said he hardly ever talked to him, so that was all he could give. Cynthia agreed on the place of work. It wasn't too bad, though. The next morning, Cynthia went to the children's sports complex where Jerry worked. At least that's what his relative had said. It was a large building. Cynthia approached the security guard and asked how to find Jerry. "Thanks. What's the last name?" Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. "Very slight DA Kinku principal aberrations. Arding applied 5 Jerry's per floor here." The woman smiled awkwardly, then aghast and reached into her bag. "Yeah, here's a picture of him. See if you recognize him." Cynthia handed the guard the photo. The man took it and hummed. "That one I know, don't I? Mr. Jerry is a karate instructor. He has a class on the 3rd floor now, room 25. Can you find it?" Cynthia nodded and set off to find him. She arrived just as the class ended, and the classroom was empty. There was only one man, tall, dark-haired, and with a large scar on his face. Are you Jerry?" The man nodded. "Do you want to put your child in the section?" Cynthia shook her head. "My name is Cynthia. I'm Betty Wright's sister." Jerry frowned. I don't want to remember anything about her. She's a terrible woman. She's changed. No, Cynthia shrieked. She's different now. She asked me to find you to apologize. She's very sorry for what she's done. You see, she's all alone. I don't care. The man said harshly. She deserved it. After all, she should have been alone. Jerry turned and walked away, leaving Cynthia alone. The woman rushed after him. But please, Jerry, please, she's unhappy and she just wants to apologize. I'm begging you. Jerry stopped, his back tense. He turned round sharply. Betty will never ask for forgiveness. She only loves herself and thinks only of herself. Cynthia frustratedly shook her head. Okay, Cynthia, just for your sake, okay? So you can see who your sister really is. Reflections of the woman brightened up and threw herself around Jerry's neck. None, thank you. Cynthia shivered. When's a good time for you? Mates, let's do it tomorrow at 5 p.m. Cynthia gave Jerry her number, and the next day he picked her up to go to Betty's house together. They pulled up to the house and the man whistled. Or does she really live here? So she should. Jerry, I'm sorry, but you can't say that about my sister, Cynthia asked. She's really unhappy. The man grinned and opened the entryway door. They went inside and up to the door. Cynthia rang the doorbell, but it didn't open. Strange, maybe she couldn't hear it. Cynthia pressed the next button. The door opened, and an old woman's head with a long nose poked through the crack. Mike, what do you want again? The old woman asked. Do you call Betty? I'd call Betty, but I can't. She's gone away. Not where? Cynthia frowned. To her daughters, I think. She said she had a daughter now. No, Cynthia shrieked and looked at Jerry in a daze. Are you sure it was to her daughters, or did she say something? She took the bus out yesterday morning. She came back in the evening, and today she put her things in a bag and took off. She said not to look for her, said she was starting a new life. What did she leave in? Ding, Cynthia asked, confused. The old woman shook her head and shut the door. The woman stepped back. What a fool I am. She's a bitch, she realized. What happened? Jerry asked and picked up the weakened woman. Let's go to the car. Jerry put Cynthia in the seat, gave her a bottle of water, and opened the window. So what happened? I don't understand. No, 25 years ago, Betty wanted to give her daughter, her newly born daughter, to an orphanage because she was going to leave with a man in another city. Cynthia sighed heavily. I took the girl for myself and raised her. I recently moved into your grandmother's house and decided to find Betty. I did. She asked about her daughter. I didn't tell her that I raised the girl myself. I lied, but she must have guessed. Somehow got the address and went to see her. So what? The girl understands that her own mother abandoned her. Cynthia shook her head. She doesn't know. I didn't tell her. I didn't think would ever turn up. No. So call her, tell her. The woman shook her head. How am I going to explain to her over the phone that I've been lying for 25 years? What am I going to say? That her mother is a liar or... Cynthia's phone vibrated. She picked it up and I had starting to cry. Jerry snatched the phone and read the message. Aunt Cynthia, how could you lie to me for so many years? I'll never forgive you for that. The man shook his head and held out a handkerchief to the woman. 25 years ago. Is this my daughter? Cynthia nodded and sobbed again. She doesn't want to see me. How am I supposed to live? The woman asked through her sobs and looked at her phone. Grabbing it, she dialed her son's number. Bruce, there. What? Is she at your place? What did she say to Gabrielle? No, tell Gabrielle it's not true. She's lying. She's Gabrielle. Listen, daughter, don't believe her. As she put the phone down, Cynthia cried even harder. Betty told her that I took Gabrielle away from her, that I did it on purpose to leave her without her daughter. Gabrielle took the phone away from Bruce and the sobs got louder and told me to never come into her life again. What am I supposed to do now? Cynthia asked Jerry to drive her home to see her daughter. The man kindly agreed, wanting to get to know her. Did Betty hurt you badly? Cynthia asked after half an hour of traveling. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She needed a distraction. Jerry grinned. At the time, I thought I loved her more than life, but it turned out I didn't. She left, and the war took over me. Did you get this there? Cynthia asked, showing us our temple. Jerry nodded. You have more children, don't you? The woman nodded. Yours. Yeah, mine, Bruce and Frank. At least they answer the phone. They say Gabrielle takes Betty's word over mine. Bruce tried to prove it to her, but all she did was go home. I'm sorry, Jerry said, turning the wheel. And let's switch to you. I'm not used to you with my peers. Cynthia agreed, rubbing the phone in her hands. Soon Cynthia and Jerry arrived at Gabrielle's house, but she didn't even open the door. Betty relayed her words and slammed the door in her sister's face without even noticing Jerry. Now, she doesn't even remember me. The man grinned, but immediately stopped talking when he saw Cynthia sliding down the cold wall. No, she wasn't crying. She just couldn't feel anything. Betty had taken a part of her life. "Let me take you home," Jerry said, sitting down next to the woman. Cynthia returned home alone. She kept dialing her daughter, but she didn't pick up and then blocked her mother's number. Bruce and Frank gave some details, but Betty shunned them, afraid they would lure her sister to their side. A few days later, Jerry arrived. He pulled up beside a leaning fence, got out of the car and clucked loud, "You look like you could use a man. The fence is all fallen down. I see the roof's thin to the first rain." Cynthia stepped out onto the porch and put a hand to her head to keep the sun out of her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I'm on holiday, so I thought I'd spend it at my childhood home, especially since it belongs to a friend of mine." "Are you going to invite me, or do you have to pay for the entrance?" The woman grinned, waved her hand in the direction of the house, and went to prepare dinner. Jerry did stay at Cynthia's house. He ordered material for the fence and even fixed the roof. All morning he climbed on it, tapping and drilling. After lunch, he climbed down, clapped his hands together and said, "Take the job, mistress, not for ages, of course, but for a couple of months will do." "Nay, thank you, let's go inside. I bought some homemade cave uses from my neighbor. Would you like some?" "Sure." The man smiled broadly, stretching the scar into a crescent shape. Every day, Jerry did something new in the house. Then he ate Cynthia's lunches and praised them. It was mandatory. The woman noticed that the uninvited neighbor was very good-looking. He was tall, trim, strong. Jerry was nothing like Cynthia's ex-husband. All he did was lie on the couch after a hard day's work. Every weekend he went to the bar with his friends, and even the day Frank had a fever of 40 degrees was no exception. Cynthia called an ambulance, and during the examination, her husband came back into the house barely standing on his feet. He yelled at the doctor and then went to sleep in the middle of the living room. Cynthia was terribly embarrassed at the time, and the doctor advised her to leave such a husband. Cynthia's new neighbor was a different kind of sensitive and intelligent. He kept up conversations about books and various places. "I've been to Prague. A colleague of mine had gone there. I was visiting him." Rita only smiled dreamily at the stories about different places. "I've always wanted to travel, but first there was Gabrielle, then Frank, and then Bruce. Besides, a teacher's salary doesn't really allow for traveling." "Why a teacher?" Jerry asked and leaned back in his chair. He and Cynthia were sitting across from each other in the living room. After a hard day's work, they were planting potatoes. Of course, it was late, the end of May. But a neighbor had given them a few buckets and said that if Cynthia was going to stay in the village, she had better plant a vegetable garden. Jerry, as usual, was not left out. "I wasn't going to go to teacher training school. But Gabriel came along, and I blew the entrance exams and went to another town so as not to hear the neighbors' ridicule. So I went to the Pedagogical Institute, and then I went to the correspondence department, barely graduated, and went to work. That's the whole secret. Of course, I like to be with children, but it's hard. I got kicked out for throwing a student out into the corridor by force." There was a whistling sound in the room. Jerry shook his head in surprise. "Me, you." "I don't believe it. That was wrong." Cynthia shook her head, and besides, he was the son of a deputy. "I also framed the school I worked at. Either you have a demon inside you, or that bastard was so bad at geography." The woman sadly remembered that day. Geography had nothing to do with it. He was just cocky and overconfident, and I was too friendly. But, whatever is done for the best, isn't it? I found a sister, and what did I end up with? No daughter. Yeah, it's definitely for the best. There was silence, broken only by the sound of a mosquito flying around the room. Evan couldn't find anything to say, so he just remained silent. Jerry and Cynthia grew closer. They sat and talked more and more often. In the evenings, he talked about the war in the army, she about the children in school. Sometimes they went to help the old lady next door, who rarely had children over. First they cleaned her house, then they helped in the vegetable garden, and Jerry also mended her fence. The old lady was very grateful and gave the helpers a can of milk and a packet of cakes. One day in late June, Jerry, realizing that Cynthia would be returning in the dark, set off after her. He met her in the middle of the road. "Now, why are you here?" "It's dark. I thought you were scared." "Today is the 22nd, Cynthia said, as if it meant something. It's the day of the shortest night of the year. Before you get home, it will be light. Isn't it? But I'm scared to be home alone. Cynthia laughed. She knew she liked Jerry, and she knew he liked her, but she didn't know what the outcome of their affection would be. The blue night sky was covered in a scattering of millions of stars, and at the very top was a bright, full-body moon that lit up the walkway so brightly that it seemed as if it was daytime outside. When you showed up at my compound and started talking about your sister, I thought you were just like her. Jerry suddenly started talking, hypocritical, bitchy, and cruel. But then I saw how upset you were about losing your daughter, and I realized you weren't. You're the kind of woman I'd always like to have by my side, Jerry admitted. Cynthia stopped breathing for a second, then took a deep breath, hesitating to look at Jerry. I haven't had a wife or even a relationship for longer than a couple of months after Betty. She took away any faith I had in women, in people, but you were able to bring it back. Your jokes, your concern for the kids, your love of work, it all made me see that there was good in this world. Why do you say that? Cynthia asked. You and I are adults. I think it only takes a couple of days at our realized age to know if someone is your person or not. Cynthia finally shifted her gaze to the man. He was looking straight at her, his eyes shining with hope and something else, some feeling unknown to Cynthia. You're very good, really. 100 times better than my ex-husband or any man I've ever had in my life. But I'm 40+ years old, with 3 kids, a bunch of problems, and a bitchy sister. Do you really need that? The man grinned and pulled Cynthia to him. I'm not 15 either, Cynthia, and I know what I need. A tiny flame of hope lit in the woman's heart, and she smiled shyly. Cynthia was walking home from camp late that night. Everything had to be prepared before the inspection. It was almost dark outside, and she was enjoying the cool night air in the moonlight. Then she saw someone walking towards her. Jerry, Cynthia smiled. A man was walking towards her with a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. Cynthia smiled, embarrassed. Is that for me? It's for the most beautiful woman in this village. Jerry tilted his head. Cynthia laughed. Oh yes, clever, very clever. Thank you. Jerry smiled back, and putting up his elbow, Cynthia put her arm around him for a walk. Only if it's all the way home, I have no strength at all. Can you imagine? We've cleaned everything we can. I don't think a cleaning lady cleans this much in a year. We also clean everything we can before the inspection. One time they made us wash the jump ropes. Can you believe it? Cynthia laughed. We took a test before camp that asked how to disinfect baby nipples. And the camp was 7 years old. How silly is that? Jerry shrugged. The phone rang. Cynthia pulled the phone out of her pocket and gasped. It's Gabrielle. The woman whispered and took a step backwards out of weakness. Jerry picked her up, afraid she would fall. With a trembling hand, Cynthia pressed answer. Hello, Gabriel? Yes, I am. And who are you? Where's my daughter? What? How long? Let me talk to her, please, Gabrielle. Cynthia put the phone down and looked at Jerry in confusion. Her eyes were filled with fear, pain, and confusion. She's been kidnapped. They told me to pay $1.05 million in cash, and they said they'd send me the address. We should go to the police. Jerry said, pulling himself together. Cynthia shook her head and sobbed. They said if I go to the police, they won't spare her. Jerry sighed, taking the woman under his arms, and led her home. Gathering their things, they headed into town. By morning, they were at Cynthia's house. She opened the door with her key and was greeted by Bruce and Frank. The boys hugged their mother and looked at her worriedly. Mom, we can't get Gabrielle on the phone, and neither can John. It's been 2 days. May. What are you all worried about? Shrieked a cheerful voice from the kitchen. A woman in a red leather jacket came out into the corridor. A girl wants to go for a walk, and you're already shouting. She's not going to live with that bloke for the rest of her life. Cynthia stared at her sister and threw herself right at her, grabbing her dark hair and pulling it. It's you. It's all you. You're the reason she stopped talking to me. You're the reason she was taken away. It's all you. Cynthia screamed. Sons and Jerry barely pulled Cynthia away from Betty. Jerry wrapped his arms around the woman and held her close, whispering soothing words in her ear. Cynthia began to go limp. You're crazy. Betty shrieked, standing up. Bruce and Frank looked at each other. Hey, Mom, are you saying she's been kidnapped? She already said that, Jerry said a little harshly. We got a ransom call. No. What makes you think it's my fault? Because there's no one else. Jerry said again, you're the only one out here messing with dangerous people. Betty tilted her head and looked into the man's face. No. Jerry, you? What are you doing here? Jerry clenched his jaw, remained silent. Guys, get her out of here, or I won't vouch for myself. Frank nodded at the door. Betty's eyes went wide. The boy took her gently under the arm and led her to the door. Go to your son-in-law's house, Betty. You'll be better off there. Nobody wants you here. We've only put up with you because of Gabrielle. Betty adjusted her bag on her shoulder and hummed, her chin high. With a quick stride, she was out of sight. A few minutes later, Bruce and Frank, Jerry and Cynthia were sitting at the table in the kitchen. Bruce was making tea while the others were talking quietly. In the middle of the table was a telephone. Suddenly it rang. Cynthia grabbed it and pressed the answer button. Yes. The money? We don't have the full amount. Give us time. Okay, we'll find it all. Gabrielle is alive. Let me talk to her. Daughter, are you all right there? No. Dropped. Bruce concluded and put the tea on the table. Mum, calm down. Did you hear Gabrielle's voice? Cynthia nodded. She was so frightened, I can't. Where can we get so much money? We could sell the cars. Frank shrugged his shoulders. No, Jerry said sharply. I've already called my friends in the army. We'll do it all. The woman jumped up from her seat and grabbed Jerry's hands. No, you'll ruin my daughter. She's my daughter too. The man objected. You haven't brought her up for years. Cynthia shouted. Don't you dare. We'll find the money and give the ransom. Sell the cars. She ordered her sons. Boys nodded. Are you sure it's all there? Cynthia asked, her trembling hands gripping the bundle. She was breathing heavily and looked around every now and then. Frank nodded. Make it look easy, please. I'm carrying money to ransom my daughter. Do you really think I can be calm? I can't be calm a priori. The boy shook his head. No. Good luck, Mum. Cynthia nodded and walked forward. She had to save her daughter, even if she had to give up all her money, her life to do it. She was ready. The criminals had called and told her to bring the money to a safe deposit box at the airport, where to pick up Gabrielle. They would tell her later. Cynthia walked uncertainly through the airport, trying to find the safe deposit boxes. She walked to the right number and slowly opened it. Putting the money inside, she slammed the metal door shut and headed away. She didn't look around or back, walking quickly and purposefully towards the airport exit. The phone vibrated and Cynthia jumped in surprise. She picked up the phone. There was a message on it with an address. It was a few blocks from the airport. The woman rushed to the car where her son was sitting. He was in Jerry's car while he waited at home. No, Frank, let's go. I'll show you the way. The guy started the car and they got moving. In only a few minutes they were there. It was an old, abandoned factory where only bums lived and boys climbed in sometimes. Cynthia jumped out of the car and rushed inside. Frank hurried after her. They searched the ground floor and then the second, then the third, and even the basement. Frank ran round almost the entire building. Cynthia screamed so hoarse she was hoarse, but the girl wasn't there. The woman turned towards her son and began to slowly slide down the cold wall. Now, Gabrielle, we lost her, Frank. We lost our Gabrielle. Frank, what am I going to do? The boy looked around confused. He shouted once more, picking up his mother. He led her to the car. While they were looking for the girl, the sun went down and it became completely dark. Frank dialed Jerry's number. Uncle Jerry, it's empty. What's going on? What? We're on our way. They found her, Frank smiled.
Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos,
turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, 2 pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. "Don't go, Robert. It'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather," she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment, he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. "Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you?" "I'm starving. I'll never make it home," she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd. In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy, she just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. "Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that." Belle was taken aback. "Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her?" Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. "Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing." After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young, that was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner, "Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance." Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him, and his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. "We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire." Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. "What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience." The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. "You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect?" "I think you misunderstood me." Robert removed her hand. "I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it." The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They'd just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatrician strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the 4 of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of 2 evils. Go to the sea with the 3 of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the 3 of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time, a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutique she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard bright lady immediately noticed, and he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, 2 parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed, "Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories?" Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. "Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything." He walked home and thought wistfully, "Nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible." The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing, soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores, Jacqueline, to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop, to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt, with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital, but no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us, it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards. What kind of whimsy is that? Echoed him in the tone of a confused director. Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them. The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. "You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his." There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him in sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. "A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you," he said. "To what do I owe?" Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. "I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria." The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. "Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance," thought the director, and said aloud, "Would you agree to help us out?" Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. "I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments." "Do not chop from the shoulder," tried to press on the pity of the director. "If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie." Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed in his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job as professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the Bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first, seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them? He was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home. Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher, who works as a choirmaster, unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later, she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten, and later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Katrin was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frighteningly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, at a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife, Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly, can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling, Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension. So he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, Madison, do you need my help or can I go? There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that. Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague, Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place. Only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over, Robert said. It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent. That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication. Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me. Because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man. Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time, to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabal in the family, he said, laughing. Then the 3 of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family. Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. "My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it." Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth, as long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that, but you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels, but his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time, he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together, a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy. I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school, disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, "Everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers." I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma: how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. to receive the award had to be not anywhere but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. "Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable," he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. "Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque," Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. "They like you," Michael said. "Who?" Jennifer didn't understand. "My parents," he explained. "They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with." She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog, then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good. There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note: "Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything." He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. "Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence?" Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon. Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. "Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes?" she exclaimed. "I'm the first to taste." She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. "By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days." "What a tragedy," said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did.